That's such a great movie. I think everybody in my position as a
Yeah.
business school professor has shown clips from that film because,
Yeah.
they're so memorable. Some of them are tongue in cheek about, the limitations of organizational behavior and trying to
Yeah.
management where HR goes wrong. But, I think one of the key things that comes to my mind when I think about that film
Yes.
is that horrible manager, help me remember his name. He's the guy that always came in and goes,
Yes.
"Yeah,"
Right.
and it was just so phony, and he always thought he had some kinda slick way,
Yes.
to trick somebody to finish the damn report or,
Yes, that's right.
do some put a new cover page on these reports or something ridiculous. But I think that captures an aspect, a limitation of managers in real life is even once they get past those 2 pitfalls of "I gotta be your buddy," or, "I'm"
Yes.
"You're my enemy, I have to trick you into doing things," like kind of, the man with the whip in the room.
Yes.
Uh, but that idea that I'm just looking for some little technique, some little hack where I can somehow squeeze a little
Yeah,
more out of
right.
my employees.
You are listening to the 5 a.m. podcast, and today is your day. Welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast. Today, we are joined by a man who spent over 3 decades decoding what truly makes organizations thrive. Dr. Thomas Becker is an organizational psychologist, best-selling author, and former business school professor who has dedicated his career to helping leaders cut through complexity to achieve remarkable results. Now, with his groundbreaking new book, Beyond the Diversity Wars, Dr. Becker offers a refreshing perspective that transcends political divides and focuses on practical, human centered solutions for creating not just inclusive workplaces, but places where everyone can contribute their very best work. Now, what makes Dr. Becker's approach unique is his ability to translate complex psychological principles into actionable strategies that entrepreneurs and business owners can implement immediately. No downtime, which is great. Having worked with countless executives and has taught thousands of students, he brings battle-tested insights on everything from motivating high-performance teams to navigating the cultural challenges that today's business leaders face. For anyone looking to build a more effective organization where people thrive while driving bottom line results, Dr. Thomas Becker's wisdom is exactly what you need to hear today. So, a warm welcome to you wherever it is that you are listening and watching from. Please consider sharing this with 3 of your friends. I know that many are going to enjoy this conversation. Dr. Becker, welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast.
Michael, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me and for the very gracious introduction. I'll do my best to live up to at least most of that.
Good. Well, my pleasure. It's always a delight to see who I find on Podmatch or who we match up with and just the interesting stories and voices and faces that we get to present here to our viewers and listeners. And so it's a pleasure to have you here. And let's start out with your book entitled Beyond the Diversity Wars. Now, this suggests maybe a new or a different approach to that word inclusion that we hear so much about. And, if you're a diamond seller or a purveyor of precious gems, you don't really like inclusion. So there's, it's interesting how old words are new again and all that kind of stuff. But
Indeed.
so for business owners concerned about navigating this complex topic, what practical, let's say, framework or structure do you recommend that avoids all those political landmines and even performance gestures?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michael. This is an age of polarization, as you know, both
Hmm.
politically with extreme views on both sides.
Yeah.
And people bring that oftentimes into the workplace. So, a real question from my point of view has been how do you get past that polarization so that people can honestly get to
Hmm.
know each other and work together effectively? Not everybody has to be best friends, but we've got to have a way to continue a dialogue without anger and dysfunctional conflict getting in the
Right.
way.
Yes.
So, in the book Beyond the Diversity Wars, which is currently under review at Oxford University Press,
Wow.
hopefully out into this year, first part of next year, I discuss two concepts that I think can be helpful to most of us, both in the workplace and in our private lives, where polarization may occur too. So the first one I call a detente mindset, and it's nothing that many of your viewers may not have thought of, like,
Yes.
conceptually, but putting it
Yes.
into practice can be devilishly hard. The basic idea behind this and the location where I started thinking about
Mhm.
this was, back when President Carter brought Anwar Sadat from
Mhm.
Egypt and Menachem Begin from Israel together at Camp David in the Maryland woods. And these two guys really did not like each other personally, and their countries had been at war and high conflict for many, many years. And yet, out of that interaction came the Camp David Accords, which has lasted remarkably long up to the present day.
Mhm.
So, the basic idea here is to be able to coexist peacefully, maintain a dialogue, and identify mutual goals that we can work
Right.
on, even in the face of disagreement, and not requiring any party to try to convince the other party that, hey, you've got to see things my way,
Right.
or I'm going to change and acquiesce and see things your way. So that's what the detente mindset to me is really all about, is a peaceful coexistence, identification and sharing of mutual goals, and
Mhm.
having a positive way to move forward in the face of disagreement. The
Wow.
other idea is whole person appreciation, but I don't want to rush on to that. If you have questions or want to
Oh,
dig into
sure.
that further.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot of information there, and it's very interesting to, especially in our world, we know that at least one third of all social media comments that we encounter on a daily basis are bought and paid for from a bot farm somewhere.
Yeah,
And, so many people that get into arguments are not even arguing with a real person, or those insulting comments that come at
right.
you. They're not even from a real person. They're from a machine.
Yeah.
And so to be able to get back to that, let's say mano a mano, that face to face interaction is something that we have to be very intentional about. And I want to get into your study on motivation. But before that, as you were talking, I was thinking about this old phrase that I had heard: "He who talks first loses." And that's kind of an old business adage of, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to be the first guy or gal to
Yeah,
say something. Can you talk
right.
about that interplay of voices that come into this business relationship and the attitude that we should actually bring to a conversation?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to kind of tie together these two ideas of a
Hmm.
detente mindset and whole person appreciation, because this is kind of where the rubber meets the road,
Yeah.
both at the initial point of conversation and wherever disagreement may occur, whether it's about social issues, work
Hmm.
related topics, or political conversations. So, yeah, I think the detente mindset is basically a way of approaching a conversation. It doesn't tell you what the
Hmm.
content should be, it's more of a
Right.
mindset, an attitude towards, hey, I'm going to have a conversation with this person. We may disagree on major or minor issues,
Hmm.
but I'm not going to kind of do what many of us do, myself included sometimes, which is fall back into, you know, reacting on the basis of perceived threat or trying to change the other person to see things your way. So
Yes.
that approach of, okay, this is how I'm going to have the conversation. I'm not going to walk away from dialogue because we disagree. I'm going to stay in the game and try to do whatever I can to further the conversation and move towards some shared goals. The
Hmm.
idea of whole person appreciation refers more to the content of the conversation. The goal here is to get to know the person throughout their, I'll just call it an identity continuum.
Yes.
What I mean by that is, on one end, we normally think of identity as kind of a category.
Yeah.
right? Kind of these social identities that people have of, hey, I'm a white male. I happen to be from Missouri, so I'm Midwestern. I have this or that political view,
Yeah.
and so on. But if you think of identity more as on a continuum rather than a category, it opens the possibility of building bridges to people that you wouldn't otherwise have if you just thought of them as a category. This is a black
Right.
woman, this is a gay male, whatever it might be. So, on one end of that continuum, you've got very narrow, almost idiosyncratic traits that somebody might have. They like
Hmm.
jazz.
Right.
Or they have a certain way of approaching problem solving, very kind of unique to them. A little further up that continuum is their personality. Are they introverted, extroverted?
Mm-hmm.
Are they open to ideas and more closed to ideas and things of that nature? Then you've got the social identities that we seem to kind of lock into, unfortunately, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not that there's anything wrong with those identities. In fact, they're very important to people and for making progress in social areas.
Right.
But
Yes.
if that's your only focus, I think you're missing possibilities. So I
Yeah.
won't go through all points of that
Sure.
continuum, but on the other extreme, you've got very broad categories like, hey, we're all members of the human race. So we've got a shared humanity there. We
Hmm.
share certain needs for existence and relationships with people and personal growth. So thinking about, hey, I want to know this person at points along that continuum rather than,
Yes.
what their political view is and so on. So I
Right.
really think that those two, I'll call them methods together, the detente mindset and trying to appreciate the person in their entirety give
Hmm.
you gives you a way through and past polarization that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Right. Yeah, and it's really about getting to know the individual. Almost sounds like valuing, just coming with this maybe a presupposition, or you've already determined this person has value, and I need to uncover that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to then talk to you about this motivation idea, and you've studied motivation for decades. And I know as a manager, I would often say I can catch more flies with honey than I can with vinegar.
Yes.
And I needed to figure out a way, in a genuine way, to build camaraderie on my team and to
Mm.
motivate people to do things they didn't always want to do,
Yeah.
but somebody had to do it. And we've all been on that spectrum of who gets to do that job.
Yes,
But
right.
so what are entrepreneurs maybe consistently getting wrong about motivating their teams? And is there maybe a simple shift that could actually lead to some really big dividends and improve engagement?
Yeah, I think that's a really kind of important connection to make
Mm,
because, having these methods kind of in isolation in a vacuum
yeah.
isn't as practical as being able to apply them in a setting where you are trying to motivate yourself or others.
Yes.
So, yeah, with motivation, when you think about it from a leadership standpoint, there's a variety of forms of influence that a leader can bring to a situation, right? Part of it is just, let's call it legitimate influence or legitimate power by virtue of their title and position. They can make requests of employees to do things. And
Yes.
more often than not, as long as that request is legitimate, employees will do it at least to some minimally
Yeah,
satisfactory,
that's right.
um, point. But then you mentioned reward, the honey,
Yes.
and maybe we could call it carrot and stick as well. It's that
Yeah,
same
that's
idea,
true.
right?
Yeah.
So, you've got, as a leader, you've got reward power if you can give people promotions or pay increases or,
Mhm.
give them a more desirable task to work on, whatever it is that they feel rewarded by. And of course, in some cases, you've got the legitimate right as a leader to punish people. I don't want to sugarcoat it. I think
Yeah.
if somebody's violating safety rules and you're working at some place like, let's say, DuPont,
Mhm.
where safety is critical by virtue of, you're dealing with chemicals and there's potential dangers there, you might have to fire somebody who's been trained and is just ignoring the rules. So that's not something you want to do, obviously, when you've got other ways to handle things, but it's a legitimate way of influence in some conditions. Now, I think the most critical thing based on your question, Michael,
Yes.
is some, but not all leaders have the most important way of influence. And I think, honestly, the most genuine or authentic way, which is by so called referent power.
Mm,
That's influencing people just because they like and respect you, right? They know you're a person of integrity. You've treated them right. They trust you, and they're going to do what they can to perform above that minimally
yes.
acceptable level
Yes.
because they, they have a relationship with you that goes beyond just the carrot and the stick, let's
Right.
say.
Yeah.
So that's where I see this kind of detente mindset and whole person appreciation coming in.
Hmm.
Because if you can use those methods in a non-manipulative way, in other words,
Yes.
you really do want to get to know your employees or the people you're working with. You really are adopting this mindset for the purpose of developing better working
Mm.
relationships or outside the workplace in your
Yeah.
private life,
Right.
then it gives you a path to that referent influence where you respect the other person, they respect you, and even where there's disagreement or adversity, you
Yeah.
can work together for the greater good. So, yeah, that's where I would say the two kind of notions
Right.
connect.
Hey, 5 a.m. friends, we're on a mission to bring these transformative conversations to a greater audience through more FM radio, cable TV, and Roku TV. And we need your help to make that happen. We're looking to raise $4,700 to expand our reach and impact more lives with these powerful morning momentum conversations. If you've found value in our discussions, please consider supporting this expansion at buymeacoffee.com/5am podcast. That's the number 5 AM podcast. Your contribution helps us create more content, improve our production quality, and build a stronger community of early risers committed to growth and encouragement. Every dollar brings us closer to our goal. Thanks for being part of this journey. Together, we're changing lives one morning momentum at a time. Yeah. Well, then I always found the other part to the motivation is handing out responsibility and
Mhm.
developing that mindset of responsibility. Could you talk a little bit to how those two things actually go together? And even maybe that respect too seems that it fits in with the premise of your book as well.
Yeah. So, oftentimes leaders have to hand out tasks and
Yes,
responsibilities and duties to other people. You mentioned earlier, sometimes those tasks are not,
that's
intrinsically
right.
rewarding.
Totally.
Somebody has to do the grunt work. Somebody has to do, what's necessary to be done. And hopefully you can work using, common motivational methods like job redesign,
Hmm.
where they have these tasks that aren't so great, not intellectually stimulating, let's say,
Yes.
but you can design and work with them to identify other tasks that do add meaning to the work. So even
Hmm.
with jobs, where you've got to delegate or designate tasks to people that those tasks aren't that rewarding, having more, tools in your toolkit
Yes.
really helps. And again, I think the detente mindset and whole person appreciation, when used, let's say, authentically and with the greater good, what I'm trying to get at is instead of just trying to have another way to manipulate people
Hmm.
or trick them,
Yes.
into being motivated, having a way that sincerely creates a relationship where employees do what they need to do because they actually want to.
Right.
It's not just about compliance. So I think, most of the great leaders that I've worked with have the goal of earning employee
Mm.
commitment rather than just complying with orders or directives. And I think having some of these methods and techniques of doing that helps leaders do their jobs, even when that job might not be giving people the tasks that they
Right.
most want to perform.
Yes. So then I want to ask you then from your professor experience and all of these students that have come through the classroom and passed the dais
Yeah.
over the years. Would you say that this was something that the light bulbs went on for the students of knowing how they had to view their
Mm.
prospective employees or business partners or anything? Could you talk a little bit about that evolution of mindset?
Sure. Yeah, I worked with undergraduate students for many years. I was in the business school most recently at the University of South Florida, the MUMA College
Wow.
of Business
Nice.
there. Great school, great teachers, and just a wonderful institution. And, so I worked with undergraduate students there, MBAs, including those in the executive MBA programs. At my previous employer, I worked with doctoral students too. And while the students differ in terms of their background and educational goals and so on, I think where the lights did turn on for a number of students, thinking about a
Yes.
career in management was getting past those two kind of pitfalls that so many managers, especially newer managers, green managers, fall
Yes.
into. One is I have to be everybody's friend and buddy.
Mm.
That's kind of the
Mm-hmm.
one
Yes.
misconception. And the other is I have to rule with an iron fist.
Yeah.
So you've got those two kinds of extremes that a lot of managers who may only have book learning or are relatively inexperienced, kind of fall into.
Yes.
Surprisingly, you find other managers have been around for a long time that have those,
Mm-hmm.
have one of those same kind of, I guess, default options for
Yeah.
management, but they don't tend to rise too far because both of those are very limiting in terms of your ability as a leader to motivate yourself and others.
Yes. So then I was going to ask you a little bit of levity to the conversation. I was
Yeah.
thinking about the movie Office Space
Oh,
because
yeah.
there's been a lot of movies made about terrible bosses and great
Right.
bosses and horrible
Yeah.
ones.
Yes.
If you think back to that movie Office Space, there's a lot of
Yeah.
teachable moments there.
There certainly are.
Could you, this is like a total audible rabbit trail, but I think
Yeah.
it'd be a fun little exercise. Could you give us maybe if you were called in after they rebuilt the burned out building to consult, could you maybe talk about where they went wrong or who were the people they really needed to push up through the company?
Yeah. That's such a great movie. I think everybody in my position as a business school professor has shown clips from that film because,
Yeah.
they're so memorable. Some of them are tongue in cheek about, the limitations of organizational behavior and trying to
Yeah.
management, where HR goes wrong. But, I think one of the key things that comes to my mind when I think about that film
Yes.
is that horrible manager, help me remember his name. He's the guy that always came in and goes,
Yeah.
"Yeah," and it was just so phony, and he always thought he had some kind of slick way
Yes.
to trick somebody to finish the damn report or,
Yes, that's right.
put a new cover page on these reports or something ridiculous. But I think that captures an aspect, a limitation of managers in real life is even once they get past those two pitfalls of I got to be your buddy or
Yes.
you're my enemy, I have to trick you into doing things like kind of the man with the whip in the room.
Yes.
But that idea that I'm just looking for some little technique, some little hack where I can somehow squeeze a little more
All right.
out of my employees
Yes.
without really respecting them. But just, I might think, well, I have to pretend to respect them so that they'll do what I say.
Yes.
People see through that. And I think that was part of the beauty of Office Spaces. You had, several characters that were looking at management and the potential change in the business and
Mhm.
all that, really seeing what was going on. And while I certainly would not recommend burning down your
Yeah,
business
that's right.
as a result, I do think there's a lesson there when it comes to what really works. And there's no
Yeah.
shortcut, there's no hack, there's no little technique. If I just had another method, I could
Mhm.
be, super boss. I think some of these methods that we've been discussing, when used with the purpose of, my job is to lead, and that means influencing myself and others
Mhm.
in a direction that's for the greater good. It's good for the
That's right.
company, it's good for me, it's good for the employees.
Yes.
really is part of the art of management.
Yeah, that's for sure. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we have a comment section. We always love to hear what you think of the conversations we've been having so far. And we've got a ways to go yet, but we always love to hear what
Yeah.
you have to say. And Dr. Becker, if you could give us ways that people could get in touch with you.
Yeah, sure. I think the easiest way right now is through my LinkedIn page. If you go
Okay.
to LinkedIn and just search for Thomas E. Becker, that's probably the
Okay.
easiest way. There's several other Tom Beckers if you just search for Tom Becker,
Sure.
but if you search for Thomas E. Becker, that'll take you right to
Perfect.
my page. And obviously, we can message. That
Hmm.
way, you can see some of the other work things I've been up to
Right.
research wise. And I write a blog, or they call it a newsletter on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Those are available. So that'd probably be the easiest way. I've
Okay.
also got a website that's going to launch in about a week. That will be thomasebecker.com.
Okay.
So that's being built right now. I'm working with a company to put the finishing touches on that site, and we plan to launch in the very near future.
Good. So by the time this comes out, the website will be live.
That's
But
great.
getting back to our conversation, I was going to ask you about just today's competitive talent marketplace. It's not only trying to get the goods, but it's trying to get good people
Yeah.
and retain them. And I know one of my friends who was a manager, and he managed a lot of engineers for a city, and he talked and kind of lamented about how long it would take
Yeah.
for his, to onboard somebody and for them to actually turn a profit on
Yeah.
the efforts of this individual. And so
Right.
for him, he was always looking for these retention strategies. And I think that there's many things that people can rely on. They could throw good money after bad, but
Yeah.
what would you say are some top or optimal retention strategies for businesses to consider?
Yeah, this is kind of in my wheelhouse because I taught human resource management for years in
Perfect.
addition to the organizational behavior topic. So in those courses and in the research I've done in HR, we dig deep into, why people do what they do and how you can design a
Hmm.
system to not guarantee success in every
Right.
instance. That's just not going to happen, but to really make it probable that you're going to have a system in place that will help you hire, retain employees, train them and develop them for
Hmm.
their own good and the good of the organization, pay them fairly, and
Yeah.
so on. So, yeah, I think there's no single answer to your question about retention, but there's a couple of things I can point to that are really central. One is surveys over the last decade have shown over and over again that the number one reason people leave, I'll just say it, they hate their boss. That's
Yeah.
the number one reason that their supervisor is, at least in the eyes of the person who leaves,
Mm.
abusive, doesn't really help them, doesn't help develop them, doesn't help them become better at their jobs. And so that really, to me, is a central learning point for almost everybody, every
Mm.
organization, that when it comes to retention, the first group you want to retain is the great managers because they're going to
Wow.
make everything else better, and there's that kind of
Yeah.
trickle down. If you're hiring great managers, then you're going to be able to retain their employees
Mm.
better and more successfully. So
Yeah.
that's really critical. The other thing is, there was a guy named John Wannis at Ohio State that for many years studied what he referred to as realistic job previews, which
Mm.
was, we're going to tell people in the interview process, applicants, what the job is actually like. And instead of sugarcoating every aspect of it, hey, this is
Right.
going to be the best thing, the most fun you've ever had, blah, 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 they include in their preview of the job some of the stuff that just is not that fun. And what Dr. Wannis found was that this may increase the percentage of people that self select out of the process. Right.
Oh,
But that
interesting.
happens early on. They find out, okay, that's not the job I want. So you don't have to
Right.
go through that process of hiring them and then them finding out that's not going to work out
Yes.
for me and they leave. So the longer term impact of a realistic job preview is you hold on to the right people
Wow.
longer. So there's some basic HR things that you can do. And then the training and development becomes so essential because all these HR pieces are kind of in the best systems
Hmm.
integrated. So you're hiring the right people, you're training
Yeah.
them. Another reason people leave is that they just don't feel like they've got the
Mm.
resources to do the job. And part of that resources is training and development that helps them perform better.
Yeah.
So yeah, those HR, I'll just call them methodologies,
Yes.
really do help organizations hold on to people and hold on to the right people.
Mm.
Maybe that's maybe the
Yeah,
more
that's
important
key.
point.
That's key. So
Yeah.
years ago when I had my team, I was a production team in the TV land. And so we would have books that we would read. And when we'd have our Monday afternoon meetings, we'd go through a chapter of the book. And one of the books that I got a few chagrins from was the E-Myth Revisited. But the reason that I wanted them to read that book is for them to develop their own systems within their positions.
Yeah.
And so if we think of maybe people have founded a company and now they have to transition themselves out of being chief cook and bottle washer,
Yeah.
and they've realized I can't do everything myself. I have to start leading a team. Are there some psychological adjustments that they need to make, or that they might realize, oh, I'm just struggling with this and it's actually psychological, and there's some tips and tricks that I could learn?
Yeah, yeah. I would say the number one psychological shift that somebody might have to make in that situation is kind of adopting a scientific perspective on the workplace. And I don't
Hmm.
mean you have to put on a white lab coat and,
Right.
play with
Yes.
rats all your life. What I mean is that you need to start thinking more scientifically, which is find out what research makes available to you. What do we know from
Mm.
research? For example, we were just talking about hiring and selection. There
Yes.
is an abundance of very detailed information that's science based in HR about the
Mm.
best ways to hire people. But I don't know if it's surprising or not. I think maybe the nature of human beings is we think our limited experience has granted us wisdom that, maybe is a little more
Right.
so than is actually there, if you see what I'm saying. I'm
Yeah.
not saying neglect your experience. I'm saying that your experience as one human being is necessarily limited.
Yeah.
And so, if you had a bad experience or a good experience using a certain way of hiring people, that doesn't mean that's going to work for you in the future. The great thing about science is it tries to look at a vast amount of data across various situations to give you a more concrete, solid, reliable answer to these important
Mm.
questions.
Yeah.
And in this area of selection, we have that information. So I don't know if this matches what you
Oh,
experienced,
no, it's
Michael,
good.
going through the workplace, but
Yeah.
a lot of managers feel like I've got some kind of, you know, unusually perceptive intuition about people. And if I just sit down and talk with them for 15 minutes, I'm going to be able to somehow divine whether this is going to be a great employee or not. And maybe sometimes that works out. More
Yes.
often than not, it's not the best way.
That's
So
right.
we know the better way is to do a job analysis, identify the task, duties, and responsibilities that are required by a job,
Mhm.
develop an interview script that, where the questions are tied to those task, duties, and
Yeah.
responsibilities,
Yeah.
and then apply that across job applicants. Because without that, it's, comparing apples to oranges if you're asking different questions, all different questions of
Yeah.
different applicants, then at the end of the day, how do you gauge who's actually going to be a better fit to
Mhm.
your company? So
Yeah.
that's just one of many methods that any manager moving into senior management or
Mhm.
trying as an entrepreneur trying to grow their business, they need to start thinking beyond the kind of n equals one
Yeah.
experience that any of us have to,
Right.
well, what do we know more broadly that could actually help us?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good answer, and I appreciate it because a great way to look at things outside of ourselves and get that maybe
Yeah.
that 30,000-foot view. But
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you one other book that I really liked, and I might get the title wrong. I believe it's called The Founder's Dilemma. I think James Allen was one of the writers of it. And it talked, or, yeah, well, anyway,
Yeah.
someone can Google and put in the comments that I'm incorrect, but
There you go.
it has to do with what happens after the founder leaves a company
Mhm.
and new people come in and maybe they do a hard right turn or a hard left turn and each chapter is a cautionary tale. The
Yes.
reason that I wanted to bring up that book is that I wanted to ask about early warning signs that a company, either the culture or the mindset, might be heading in a problematic direction, and what immediate interventions do you recommend for a company that they don't know the bridge is out, but they're speeding around the corner?
Yeah, I'd have to say that the honest answer to that is it depends on why the company is losing effectiveness. If it's because the founder retired or
Mm,
moved on, then succession planning is the answer. And
mm,
in the best of all worlds, this would be done before the founder retires or
right?
leaves. So
Yes.
you'll find this it's interesting, Michael. You'll find these effective methods more likely to be in large organizations. For example, I was at
Mm,
Procter and Gamble as an intern many, many years ago, and there were a handful of PhD whose only job was to develop selection methods for the company. That was their only job.
wow.
And they were great at it. But a smaller or even mid-sized organization is not going to be hiring these PhDs to
Yes.
give them all this advice. And, there's a little bit of an irony here because the smaller organizations are the ones less able to do that, but they're the
Mm,
ones that need advice the most. One bad hire at Procter and Gamble
yes.
or Apple or Microsoft, it's not going to sink the ship,
Yeah,
most likely.
that's right.
But when you've only got 5, 10, 15 employees, one bad hire could really mean the difference
Hmm.
between success and failure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, first you've got to just use a little common sense and diagnosis. What is the problem? And you
Right.
can look at, kind of the common indicators of a major problem. One would
Hmm.
be obviously falling profits,
Yeah.
less interest in a product, even when the economy is pretty good. You're looking at how your competitor's doing and they're doing
Hmm.
fine or getting better and you're falling behind. That's a pretty
Yeah.
obvious sign.
Yeah.
If turnover's going up, suddenly, if performance is dropping, and I use the term here performance not only to refer to like enroll, task
Yes.
duties and responsibilities, but more broadly, I guess I'd call it organizational citizenship behavior. That's
Mm,
a term used in my field where people, it's kind of the social lubrication of an
yeah.
organization, people helping each other out even when they're not required to do so, kind of going
Right.
above and beyond. That's where leadership is so important. So, yeah, there's these
Hmm.
indicators that can tell you something's wrong. And then you've got to rely on, a rational approach to problem solving to
Yeah.
help you figure out,
Right.
well, what could it be? And
Yeah.
then once you know what it is, you can dig into some of the scientific literature and find out. And of course, you're also your own relevant experience.
Yes.
Again, I'm
That's
not
right.
saying that, but there's help available to you. I used to do a lot of consulting. I don't do consulting anymore because I'm semi-retired and writing books and things like
Right.
that. But you have to be careful, of course. There's some great consultants out there in consulting businesses that really do know what they're doing and they've got the experience and they're taking a scientific approach. And then
Hmm.
there's others that are just going to pull something off a shelf. Here's your problem, do
Yeah.
this, and
Call me in the
and move
morning.
on. So you got to
Yeah.
be kind of careful there. But there are good
Oh,
consultants that
that's
can help businesses of any size.
oh, that's great. And so I did a quick search, and it's The Founder's Mentality by Chris Zook and James
Okay,
Allen. And that was an enjoyable book for me to
great.
read.
Good to
But
know.
Dr. Becker, I got to thank you so much for your time today and this great conversation.
It's my pleasure, Michael, and thanks for having great questions and having been prepared and cordial throughout. So it's been
Oh,
great
my
working with you and
pleasure.
speaking with you.
I know. I wish we had more time, but I'll just have to have you back because I feel like I was sitting in a short lecture I was thinking back to those college years,
Yeah,
but it
okay,
was
all
good.
right. Good for
Yeah,
you.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah, my
And
pleasure talking with you, and I'd be happy to come back, whenever you'd like, Michael.
oh, absolutely. And so to our viewers, thank you so much for being here. As I mentioned, please drop something in the comments about how we did today. We do appreciate you joining in on this conversation. And of course, if you haven't already, please give us this channel a like, a subscribe, and a share, because I know there are friends that you're probably thinking of that so-and-so needs to hear this, and we'll just say, yes, they do. Send it off to them, and they'll appreciate it. Thanks for participating today in 5 a.m. podcast mission of, well, just being a purveyor of hope and leading, maybe shining some light in some dark places. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for being here, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for all your support. Until next time, please seize your day, enjoy those sunrises and sunsets, and all those adventures in between. I'm Michael Claassen. Before we wrap up today's conversation, I want to share an exciting opportunity with our 5 a.m. community. We're expanding our reach with more FM radio, cable TV, and Roku TV to bring these life-changing conversations to even more people seeking transformation and momentum in their lives. To make this happen, we've set a goal of raising $4,700, and we're inviting you to be part of this growth. Your support, whether it's just the price of a coffee or something more, directly impacts our ability to create more content, improve our production quality, and reach those who need these messages the most. When you support us at buymeacoffee.com/5am-podcast, that's the number 5 AM podcast, you're not just donating, you're joining our builder circle, and you're helping expand this community so more people can hear these encouraging conversations. Every contribution, no matter the size, moves us closer to our goals and strengthens our community of early risers committed to personal growth and positive change. Together, we can impact thousands more with the wisdom and inspiration shared on this show. Thank you for considering a building donation today at buymeacoffee.com/5am-podcast. Your support, it means the world to us. And together, we're creating and changing lives one morning momentum at a time.